I think we are all here. Welcome and good morning to everybody. I would request all the panel members to please turn on their videos and we can get started. I would welcome Preeti to give opening remarks this morning. Preeti, over to you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this panel on behalf of the UN Capital Development Fund, where I'm privileged to serve as its Executive Secretary. And we do this meeting today, this morning, along with our partners, the joint SDG Fund and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, showcasing our work in blended finance. So allow me to share a few comments to kick off this morning's session. Last week, in this continuing UN General Assembly timeframe, we had a rich discussion on how collaborating with a range of partners to create innovative financing solutions that can catalyze investments in SMEs in the 46 LDCs we served. Today, we will demonstrate how the same tools and principles are being used to support biodiversity and the blue economy, particularly in the small island states. Allow me to first recognize Ambassador Satyendra Prasad, Permanent Representative of Fiji to the United Nations, as well as Mrs. Evelina Wevers-Crowe, Prime Minister of Aruba and Minister of General Affairs, Integrity, Energy, Innovation, and Government Organization. I would also like to acknowledge the Honorable Ayaz Saeed Qayyum, Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service, Communications, Housing, and Community Development of Fiji, who could not be here personally, but we do have a video recording of his pre-recorded remarks. Excellencies, ministers, ambassadors, government delegations, and all other attendees joining us today, thank you so much. Your presence is very much appreciated. As I did last week, I would like to kick off with a handful of reflections in our blended finance work and UNCDF's overarching approach to mobilizing private capital for impact. Our ambition at the UN Capital Development Fund is to be a go-to resource for catalytic financing for the LDCs within the UN development system. We believe that UN agencies can combine development support with investment support to attract more public and private capital into development. Indeed, the initiative that we will hear more about today accomplishes this. Through a catalytic investment of USD 3.5 million, the joint SDG Fund and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs are helping to mobilize capital from asset owners, fund managers, and institutional investors to accelerate biodiversity and nature preservation efforts in Fiji. These types of catalytic investments allow for two important things. First, they use donor funding to protect commercial investors from financial loss and de-risk investments through technical assistance, capacity building, and the like. Second, they pay for demonstration effects, therefore allowing innovative models of financing to be tested, scaled up, and to achieve more impact. The program being discussed here today integrates some of these elements. It aims to leverage $50 million in investment capital by 2030 within the UN system, playing a mediating role between the private sector and the government to ensure that the selected projects are both impactful and investment ready. Although I mentioned this in my remarks last week as well, I would be remiss not to reiterate the important role of the joint SDG Fund process in prioritizing the agenda of the LDCs and the SIDS. As you may already know, the process was instrumental in generating proposals across the UN system for innovative and blended vehicles. 155 proposals were received, and Fiji was one of the 4 countries selected. Fiji's selection is as strong a signal as any that the joint SDG Fund endorses the goals of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which unites various UN agencies under the umbrella of SDG 14. Joining UNCDF in this effort are UNDP, UNEP, MPTF, who are all playing specialized but complementary roles in supporting the goals of the fund. We believe that this level of collaboration is a force multiplier that is needed within the UN development reform process. much depends on our ability to engage seamlessly within, across, and outside UN agencies. Our own strategic framework 2022-2025 recognizes this fact. As I close, I would like to end as I did last time, because so much of what I said cannot be done alone. UNCDF recognizes that no single entity can resolve the complex challenges and opportunities of scaling up sustainable finance solutions, especially in the LDCs and the SIDS. For this reason, much of our efforts are focused on expanding our investment work, which has so far demonstrated that we can deploy capital and leverage it up to 6 times by crowding in other investors and local banks. This is an indication of our commitment to complementarity and additionality. The fact is that our view of and the tolerance of risk differs from many other players that support the missing middle. The collaboration with the joint SDG Fund, the Coral Reef Fund, and all the UN agencies involved in this effort is a powerful example that the missing middle, the companies that fall in that range, and that catalyze SDG investments in local economies through blended finance. With that, I would like to turn it back over now to Honorable Ayaz Said Qayyum, who will provide his introductory remarks through a video recording. So over back to the moderator for this video. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Preeti. We'll just share our screen and play the video.
Bulavinaka from Fiji. The story of our changing climate is the story of a changing ocean. As the planet's largest carbon sink, the ocean has long served as a mighty blue shield from the worst of the climate crisis. Here in our capital, Suva, looking over the vast Pacific horizon, it's easy to fall into the fantasy of thinking that protection is without end. But it is not endless. All it takes is a glimpse beneath the surface and a hard look at the science to dispel that illusion and reveal how fragile our ocean ecosystems can be. Without urgent action to drastically cut carbon emissions, we will push our ocean past a tipping point that will doom the life it supports, including humankind. Last year, 80% of the world's oceans suffered massive heat waves, threatening oceanic life at a scale never before. Massive stretches of coral reefs are bleaching, and fish populations are dying or moving away from communities that have long relied on them for food. The 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change shows that unchecked ocean emissions put us on course for an anthropogenic self-destruction by this century's end. If we continue our death march towards 2100, by maintaining or increasing current levels of emissions, the IPCC report warns that the projected rate of ocean warming could double in this century or even skyrocket up by 8 times. Marine heat waves are projected to be longer and more intense, with the Pacific seeing up to 100 days of marine heat waves annually at 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. This would double at 2 degrees Celsius of warming, reaching an average of 200 days. That impending disaster is no less of an existential threat to Pacific Islands than the rising seas. The ocean is life in Fiji. It is where we fish for food that feeds families and creates income, and it forms an intimate piece of the identity of every Fijian. When you look at our blue planet, Fiji is not a small patch of Pacific Islands. We are a large ocean state. Our 1.3 million square kilometers of ocean make us the 26th largest country by EEZ in the world, and the 6th largest country in terms of coral reef area. Our coral reefs make up an estimated 10,020 square kilometers of coral reefs, or 3.52% of the world's entire coral reef population. Fiji champions what we call the ocean climate nexus, because we see it in front of our eyes every day. The climate crisis is an oceans crisis, and that is why we seek a permanent home for oceans in the UNFCCC process through the Oceans Pathway. Poorly led nations are destroyed by a crisis. Well-governed nations survive a crisis. But truly great nations are defined by a crisis. We are in the defining hours of the ocean climate crisis. We can tell you Fiji does not intend to be destroyed. We do not intend to merely survive. We intend to turn this crisis into an opportunity to build a sustainable and prosperous blue economy. We have committed ourselves to achieve the 100% sustainable management of our ocean by 2030, with 30% of Fiji's EEZ to be designated as marine protected areas. Our Climate Change Act enshrined these development-defining commitments in law. To fund that effort, we are pioneering innovative financing mechanisms. Following the success of Fiji's Green Bond in 2017, we are working with the Government of the United Kingdom and the United Nations Capital Development Fund to issue a blue bond by the middle of 2022. We are working with our development partners on blended finance solutions that can leverage impact financing for transformative ocean conservation projects. And we are bringing the private sector on board to tap the potential of big blue opportunities. We welcome the opportunity to partner with the Global Fund for Coral Reef, or GFCR, to implement projects that will help protect Fiji's pristine marine biodiversity and create economic returns within and beyond the tourism sector. The proposed establishment of 30 marine protected areas around Fiji, the construction of an organic fertilizer factory and a sanitary landfill in Western Fiji, and the establishment of a technical assistance facility to support Fijian SMEs in the marine space are all welcome initiatives. We hope we can achieve much more together. And as Fiji continues to push the boundaries for innovative climate finance in the Pacific, we look forward to new frontiers of joint collaboration and cooperation with the joint United Nations SDG Fund. Our Prime Minister's vision is for Fiji to be a compass that points towards better, greener, and bluer societies. We are ready to be a testbed for blue innovation. We are ready to put innovative finance to work. We are ready to set Fiji towards the future we all want for ourselves. I wish you all the best with your panel discussions. We will see you in Glasgow. Vinakava Kalevu, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would now turn over to Madam Prime Minister of Aruba for her remarks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Greetings from this very beautiful island of Aruba. We know all too well that as SITs, we are disproportionately vulnerable and that our livelihoods are threatened like no other. It has become increasingly clear how climate change is a threat multiplier and undermines our assets, our food system, our health, and the viability of economic and human advancements. We also know that we are not in a decision-making position that will eliminate the imminent impacts of this global challenge. But through respect for local knowledge, application of developmental ingenuity, wise use of technology, and ecosystem-centered cooperation, we can transform our societies and our economies to secure sustainable futures for mankind. We need to have a clarity of vision and have hope. Addressing local challenges by identifying the key levers and entry points for sustainable development will guide small island states into enhanced governance, diverse economies, and blended financial structures that will inspire local communities to participate in individual and collective action. The real change can only be made with a strong political commitment locally and globally. We need a system-wide change, and as SITs, we need to keep making our voices heard and be guided by a positive vision of what the world can look for us. And we need to do this together. Each individual, each community, each country. We need to focus on fit purpose and innovative solutions and financing to fix the daunting reality. The role of the UN providing long-term ecosystem-centered financing is crucial for the achievement of the targets described in the SDGs. This structured and collective guidance provided by the Fijian government is exactly what small island nations have called on to in the past when addressing climate change and development bottlenecks. By promoting blended financing, reef-positive adaptation is recognized as the foundation for equitable food and water systems, just and resilient economic development within a changing climate, providing communities with the tools and opportunities to thrive in harmony with nature. The case of the Government of Fiji, the Global Coral Reef Fund, and the joint partnership with the SDG Fund and the UNCDF will provide a successful example of scaling up and accelerating the conservation, sustainable use, and restoration of marine biodiversity through alignment of global objectives and local actions. It clearly aims to go beyond the scope of only reducing operational emissions, and it provides incremental steps to decouple nature impact from economic development. As a coral reef country, it is empowering transformative economic development to become sustainable, and it involves private sector through support, through investment and philanthropy as key contributors. The proposed financial flow system will fortify small island nations' efforts in achieving diverse economies through application of blue economy principles. For other coral reefs nations, it is a tangible case study that can be used for in-country application. For Aruba, within the Caribbean region, it can mean securing sustainable financing to upscale our efforts that have already been undertaken to achieve resilient reef systems. We have initiated several programs in Aruba and adapt policy and legislation, including enhancing our water quality monitoring program with indicators for environmental health so it can amplify its human-centered approach, which is a basic tenet of my government. With this said, I welcome the presentation of the joint effort between the UN system and the Government of Fiji as a scalable example for the Caribbean region. We may be on opposite sides of the globe, but our commonality binds us, and it is only together, including through South-South cooperation and help of our global partners, that we can create imperative change. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. We do now have a short video, which is of some of our colleagues here today from Fiji.
Fiji has some of the most resilient reefs in the world. Under a 2-degree warming scenario, Fiji's reefs are the most likely to survive. These corals could be used to reseed reefs around the world that have died in 20 to 30 years' time. But if we don't stop the local anthropogenic threats, then these reefs will not survive. In Fiji, we have a problem. We have poor waste and pollution management. We have agricultural runoff. We have deforestation driven by agriculture. We have overfishing. We need to stop these issues if we are going to save our reefs.
These actions are causing damaging ripple effects that we are witnessing in real time that seriously threaten the survival of our coral reef systems and key marine species. My name is Natasha Morosi. I'm the Director of Conservation for Bang Adventure Divers and the Program Coordinator for My Fiji Shark. Our solution is to establish fully protected fish banks, allowing marine biodiversity to expand and to overflow.
My name is Jody Smith and I work with Matanotaki. At Matanotaki, we work with private sector businesses who can bring about transformational change to the environment and to Fiji's reef systems. In Fiji, our waste has not been managed properly historically. Most of our dump sites They sit on the coast. They sit on mangrove. We were walking on one of these dump sites earlier today, and it's basically a floating mass of waste.
That entire zone, that entire dump is actually floating in a marine ecosystem. My name is Paul Evers. I work for HG Leach, and we run the only international standards landfill in the South Pacific on Fiji. The Vulavulesara project is a visionary project to contain, manage waste away from the marine ecosystem, away from the coastal areas. Vulavulesara will enable the recycling of 80% of that waste stream to recycle and upcycle materials, and particularly plastics, so they can be repurposed within Fiji and the Pacific.
I'm Sanjeev Chand, the founder of the Fertile Factory and Company and one of the directors of Waste Clear Fiji Limited. We will be replacing imported chemical fertilizer. We will be making a natural product using what is now considered waste. So the wasted opportunities, which is all the biomass, green waste, will be turned into a product that would be a natural fertilizer. And once we unite our farmers with our natural products, the impact, the devastation that has been caused by chemical runoffs from these fertilizers over decades on our reef system, slowly but surely, we will turn that around.
We're able to bring government, the private sector, the general public, the communities, we can all come together. And of course the donors and the investors, we can all come together to solve the problem. I think this is something in the past that has been missing. Multiple stakeholders, innovative blended financing, and local solutions. We haven't had this bigger picture approach, and this is what this program is providing.
We will now turn over to Lisa for her moderation of the panel. Over to you, Lisa.
Very good. Thank you, Abhishek. Honorable guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to this UN General Assembly side event, Blended Finance and Action, the Road to Doha on SDG Finance and LDCs, with a focus on blue economy and Fiji's coral reef. My name is Lisa Kerbiel. I'm head of the Secretariat of the Joint SDG Fund. I am delighted to moderate today's panel with a really star-studded group of speakers and guests. And that video, I think, really brings it home to many of us how important this conversation is today. Our guests today include Ambassador, His Excellency Dr. Satyendra Prasad, Permanent Representative of Fiji to the United Nations, Ms. Penny Stock from the UN Development Program, who is the lead of the Coral Reef Conservation and Global Fund Coral Reef Focal Point, Mr. Anders Berlin, who's Director of the LDC Investment Platform at the UN Capital Development Fund, Ms. Jody Smith, we just saw in the video, who's partner in Matanotaki, Mr. Sanjeev Chand, CEO and founder of the Fertile Factory and Company, Mr. Terry Tamminen, Operating Advisor, Pegasus Capital Advisor, Mr. Olivier Wenden, Vice President and Chief Executive Officer of the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and Mr. James Smith, Deputy Director, Marine Environment of the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs of the United Kingdom. As you can see, it's a star-studded panel. It's a large panel, so I won't waste any more time. I'll get right into it. I'd like to begin with His Excellency Ambassador Prasad, again, our ambassador of Fiji to the United Nations here in New York. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us bright and early today. Our first question to you is really about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the reality that Fiji is reopening by the end of this year, so just in a few months. And could you please share with us what are some of the lessons that have been learned from the crisis, and what are Fiji's plans in terms of taking advantage of its magnificent natural resources, of course, its beautiful coral reefs and its marine and coastal ecosystems? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and to all the panelists, Honorable Prime Minister and Executive Secretary. Good morning to all of you, and good evening to folks in Fiji and elsewhere. Thank you very much for inviting me and for presenting this this panel and this discussion on the margins of UNGA. I think that's also significant in itself, because one of the big messages of General Assembly is that for SDGs, the volume of resources that are available to achieve the SDGs are simply not available in the development financing as we know it. And so the world as a whole needs to be looking much more innovatively and creatively at private sector financing. So that's very important that you're having this discussion. In response to your question, Fiji is one of the most severely impacted countries in the world by COVID crisis, and that's a measure of the extent to which tourism is, and the blue economy around tourism is part of the Fijian economy. That has been in shutdown mode for 14, 15 months now. There's been virtually zero tourists and close to minus 18% economic decline. So it demonstrates how dependent countries like ours are on the blue economy, and what happens when a big shock as COVID happens. Fiji is likely to open in slightly more than a month. The way in which Fiji is thinking is that the approach to blue economy and the approach to tourism has to be very, very different from the way in which it was structured before. Build back better and build back bluer and build back greener are essential part of our thinking. That tourism should begin to look less like an extractive industry and more as a contributing to global goals and sustainability, sustainable management of oceans, and that the service, environmental and ecological service provides are given a lot more value in the way in which we repurpose the tourism industry and our recovery. And the Honorable Minister has given you some signature lines about that. Fiji's 100% approach to 100% management of its entire 2.3 million square kilometers of oceans by 2030, 30% marine protected area. Fiji has already declared a moratorium on deep sea bed mining and the other aspects have been brought to you quite sharply. So it's a very imaginative, bold, and comprehensive approach to building sustainability. And this discussion is very useful in how we fund essential parts of that build back bluer and build back greener.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think there's no doubt that Fiji will be setting an example for many of the small island developing states where tourism is such a critical piece of the economy. And I love your analogy to the extractives. I think that's a very important part for all the travelers out there to keep in mind when they go to visit beautiful islands like yours. You know, part of, and the minister's speech was so powerful in really outlining some of the steps taken by government. This project and this collaboration really does showcase partnerships. It's 3 UN agencies, right? The Capital Development Fund, the UN Development Program, the UN Environmental Program. As was pointed out in the video, private entrepreneurs, private investors, civil society. Have you seen this mix of players to be the right one? Is anybody missing? What do you think it tells all of everyone tuning in about the new way of building back better?
So thanks very much. I think 2 things have come together. One, the Secretary General's effort for a one UN and a joined up UN. This is at show. This is at display in its finest. And I really want to congratulate UNCDF, UNDP, UNEP, and Lisa, the SDG Fund. Where people may have lost the detail that the trigger for this very substantial private sector financed and philanthropy financed approach to sustainability and blue economy in Fiji was the SDG Fund, which provided the initial financing. So there are 2 parts of it. One is the ability of the UN to come together in a joined up way and bringing the comparative advantages of different agencies such as UNCDF and UNDP and UNEP and of course SDG fund in that cohesive, with coherence, apply to a very practical outcome. So I want to congratulate the UN as a system and the RC's office in providing the coordination effort. On the other end, the things that we are talking about, that we have to catalyze private sector investment, that we have to leverage the grant financing that is available for larger private sector investment that is needed for the scale of the problems, as the video has shown. These are a very significant, multi-million dollar type of investments. And so you brought the pieces together in a creative and innovative way to be able to catalyze the level of funding that is needed to get us over the line. So fantastic partnership between Fiji government and a joined up UN system. Fantastic, I'd say, quantum leap on the UN as a system in being able to leverage and catalyze private sector financing, and for all the groups that you will be hearing about of them being able to come together in a focused and targeted way. And my only plea and urge would be that that the initial funding, such as the SDG Fund, that allowed the initial trigger, that these are well resourced, and that the pipeline of financing available to it is continued, so other countries can benefit from that, and that the grant components that is financing the leveraging of private sector financing, such as that coming from GCF, are well resourced, and that the OECD especially increases the level of its commitment for climate financing, from which some of the grant elements are drawn down, that helps us catalyze. But it's fantastic. I think with initial 3 million of grant investment, you are in the end getting a package of about 100 million USD of financing, and that's a great, I'd say, great tribute to Fijian government and the UN as a system on this program, but a fantastic lesson for so many other countries on how far we can go. And I only want us all to push this further. This is just one set of problems. This is a small subset of Fijian sustainable blue economy, and the blue economy across the Pacific is 40 million square miles. So within the Pacific, there's limitless potential, and across the small island or large ocean states, the infinite possibilities of taking this forward.
Excellent, Ambassador. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think many on our panel, and I'm sure tuning in, are part of the movement, right? We're starting a movement for SDG investments around the world. We're de-risking, but we're also translating the reality of the SDGs into what could be investable projects, which I think is fascinating and really exciting. So you're already describing the success of bringing all of us together, but let's look down the road. Let's look down to 2025, 2027, 5 or so years from now. How can we enlarge this? I mean, how do you see success, as you just said, beyond this particular project, but really trying to amplify and build on this example, build on the learnings, build on Fiji's leadership in this area?
So, as the minister said in his recorded message, we are all looking with great excitement to the potential of this project itself. That's the first thing I think we need to make sure that this is a hugely successful, and I have no doubt that this will be a hugely successful program that are bringing so many pieces together. The main beneficiary of this is the planet. That's where we need to start from. It's restoring Fiji's environmental services and restoring its coral reef structures and infrastructure, and making a significant dent on them. So that's one part. If you the problem that has been described in the video is not a Fiji problem. That is a problem that you will see in countries over and over again. Landfill and urban waste. These are expensive items, ticket items, and for small island developing states. And in a context where what I've described, with a nearly minus 20% economic decline, they're competing pressures on resources. We have to prioritize resources on food, on health, on education. And so these type of investments, however important they are, and they are so important, have to drop down. And so we have to look at this innovative solution. So my first 5-year pitch is that this is hugely successful. It becomes like Malawi last week. It provides the courage to other countries and to the UN system to look at a broader range of similar type of programs. My second plea to everyone who's listening is that look at the triggers, the co-financing and where the co-financing are coming from. These are philanthropic organizations, Coral Reef Fund, organizations that are deeply committed to environmental sustainability and restoring balance across the planet. Thank you very much. And then within the UN system, you have SDG Fund and the GCF and GEF. All of these are financed from similar type of pools. This week, my Prime Minister, in his address to the UN General Assembly last week, has called for climate finance to be increased from 100 billion per year to 750 billion per year, beginning from 2025, of which 10% should be dedicated, he has called for large ocean states, for small island developing states. So I think with that volume of finances available through the various systems, you can begin to catalyze private sector investment on such a transformational scale, truly transformational scale. And if you are using the ratio that we are seeing over here, 3 billion of SDG, mobilizing 100 million plus of private and other finances, with the 100 billion, you should be able to mobilize $1 trillion with 750. That is mobilizing, $5 to $7.5 trillion. That then we are beginning to look at the scale of funding that is needed to return the planet to stability again, and to be able to fund the scale of climate actions, climate and oceans actions that are needed. So I really think, and I hope in Glasgow we'll cross the 100 billion line, that in 5 years' time we will have enough global momentum and the success of programs like this that lifts people up to lift our gaze and be able to tackle the scale of problems that are before us. We lose this, we will probably have wasted our life on this planet. I think this is the biggest thing we can do in this generation.
No, couldn't agree more, and I really appreciate that you bring it back down to the humanity level, because at the end of the day, it is the most vulnerable who suffer the most from climate change, right? It is women and children and those who are most vulnerable. So we want to keep them absolutely in front of all of us as we continue on this. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those powerful remarks. I'm sure we'll come back to you in the Q&A. And I do see questions coming in through the chat, which is wonderful. We will be getting to those after we speak to all of our esteemed panelists. So without further ado, Ms. Penny Stock, I go to you now. You are lead of the Coral Reef Conservation and Global Fund for Coral Reef focal point of the UN Development Program. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs was launched a year ago as the first UN fund devoted to the conservation and restoration of coral reefs. Would you tell us a bit about how you do support the investments in ecosystems and how this addresses conservation funding challenges for coral reefs and beyond?
Yes, thanks so much, Lisa. And first of all, greetings to all the distinguished presenters and panelists, colleagues and participants today on the call. Thank you for the opportunity to take part in this important event. Yes, it was just 1 year ago that the GFCR was launched during the 2020 UNGA. It is the first UN fund focused on SDG 14 and the only global blended finance instrument devoted to coral reefs. And it's this focus on leveraging the combined power of public and private finance that the fund actually represents a now or never opportunity to pull reefs back from the brink of extinction. But as you say, the challenge is really immense, and especially when we have this massive coral reef funding gap. Resources for coral reef conservation fall far short of what's needed, but yet enormous financial resources continue to be invested in activities that harm reefs and related ecosystems. But this is where the GFCR can step in. The fund aims to raise and invest at least $500 million in capital by 2030 through an innovative coalition of UN agencies, financial institutions, including private sector players and vertical funds such as the Green Climate Fund and private philanthropy sources. And it's a blended finance vehicle that will provide a combination of grants and risk equity capital, debt and concessional finance through its grant and investment windows. And it's through this investment ecosystem that will enable, we hope, local communities and enterprises to implement reef-positive solutions at scale in priority ecosystems.
Fabulous. And thanks so much for that overview. Maybe now zoning in a little bit on Fiji. As was mentioned earlier, Fiji was the first joint program selected out of over 155 proposals received by the UN's Joint SDG Fund, but also by the GFCR. Could you describe the impact proposition and why was Fiji's ecosystem so important from a biodiversity standpoint?
Yes, so as we can see in Fiji, the fund's already playing a vital role in unlocking major private sector investment towards coral reef conservation and restoration in developing countries. And as many of you will know, Fiji is known as the soft coral capital of the world. And so clearly it's a priority country for the GFCR. And it's one of the most extensive and resilient coral reef ecosystems in the world, holds enormous cultural significance for indigenous Fijians, and it's also heavily relied upon by the country's population for sustainable fishing, coastal protection and income generation. And importantly, their reefs and related ecosystems are also home to 5% of the world's total reef regeneration capacity. And that means that Fiji harbours critical climate refugia, as documented by global studies such as 50 Reefs and the WWF Reef Rescue Initiative. And this is where areas of reef are more resilient to the effects of global warming and acidification. And these areas, if they're managed effectively, could recover and help to populate other damaged reefs. So it's a way of actually saving the biome. And I should say that the fund's theory of change is actually based on this very premise, that we should invest in coral reefs with the greatest chance of survival, the world's most resilient reefs, through direct conservation and targeted actions to reduce local drivers of reef degradation. And it's this integrated approach that gives reefs the best chance of survival and provides communities with the best chance of retaining the ecosystem services that they depend on.
Fascinating that you're building on science for your theory of change for the entirety of the fund. It's fascinating. I'm sure many will want to know more. You mentioned you're now taking us more specifically towards the investment itself. I mean, for those new to this conversation, maybe joining us through the General Assembly windows, how do you turn a natural capital asset like a coral reef into a business opportunity? I mean, I think that's the multi-billion-dollar question on many minds around the world. But if you could share a bit of your insights into that.
Sure, and I agree that is entirely the question. How do you monetize reefs in a way that's sustainable? So I might just turn the question around a little bit, because natural capital assets, if they are effectively protected and managed for resilience and sustainability, yes, they can generate profit and support livelihoods over many generations. But this is not really a question about transformation or turning ecosystems into something or further modifying or exploiting the natural environment. Rather, it's about how we can preserve and restore ecological integrity while creating business opportunities that respect and account for the true value of nature. So it's about monetizing ecosystem services while protecting and effectively managing the fabric of life, the very assets that underpin those services. So the way that the fund intends to try and achieve this is through investment in a diverse range of blue economy sectors, for example, in sustainable tourism through the development of eco-hotels, sustainable fisheries, including aquaculture and mariculture, coastal restoration, such as coral restoration, mangrove restoration, blue carbon, investment in marine protected areas, plastics management, wastewater management, and others. And in practical terms, what we want to see then in these initiatives, in these sectors, are activities that redirect financial flows from reef negative to reef positive, that create new market instruments that favour the sustainable management of reefs, that ensure corporate accountability towards reefs and towards their dependent communities, that we increase private finance for coral reef conservation and catalyse those all-important local reef-positive enterprises.
Fantastic. So now that you've sort of been working in this diverse group of stakeholders, can you maybe highlight, Ms. Stock, the importance of bringing together everyone from the local communities to the government, to the UN and others in a coalition like this?
Absolutely, and UNDP is extremely proud to be part of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs with our UN partners, CDF and UNEP and the MPTFO, the SDG Fund. You know, together we're all working with our country partners to achieve the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. And we must remember that nature is the basis of more than half of all SDG targets and underpins half of our global GDP. So it's crucial that we leverage our agency capacities and complementary advantages as one UN, to address this multi-dimensional planetary emergency of nature loss, climate change, poverty, inequality, COVID-19. But specifically in terms of UNDP's contribution to GFCR, we have an on-the-ground presence that enables to deliver direct support to every coral reef country across the globe. And we are supporting and will support GFCR financed initiatives in a range of nations, and especially in those harder to invest LDCs and SIDS. And from our perspective, it's absolutely crucial that private investment is targeted towards results that benefit both the reefs and the communities that depend on them. We need to empower local communities and enterprises to test and identify new business solutions that help to protect their reefs. We want to build innovative partnerships between states and sector, transform livelihoods away from degradation, and make sure we get that vital technical assistance into countries to scale up results, promote replication and ensure sustainability. And obviously UNDP has played a crucial role since the start of the fund, helping to develop the fund strategy and theory of change and support the development of the investment plan with the very generous support of the government of Sweden. And we should just end by saying that we're fully committed to work with all the GFCR partners, to make a success of this Global Fund for Coral Reefs.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Much appreciated. I'll turn now to Mr. Anders Berlin, who is the director of the LDC investment platform at the UN Capital Development Fund. Anders, good morning. Given your expertise and that of UNCDF, I'd like to pivot us now to the financing side of the equation. You've worked in this area, you have tremendous expertise, Anders. Why is this program special, in your opinion? And can you tell us a bit about the financial solutions that have been proposed, and why are they really the best fit for this particular challenge?
Sure, and thank you, Lisa, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all out there. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and speaking about this very important topic. There's a lot to learn, and we've heard now from Penny. We've heard how science is fighting to produce the right recipe for restoration and conservation. So while the science is trying to keep up with sort of developments, bad developments as a sector, the business line, the blue economy is new, right? And with this joint program, we want to contribute to it to become a business in its own right, helping the implementation of scientific evidence. And the World Bank defines the blue economy as the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs while preserving the health of ocean ecosystem. So it's about economic growth and jobs, as well as preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem. And in some cases, of course, restoring it. Now the bad news, and you also heard that from Penny, now the bad news is that current financing for coral reef conservation and sustainable use is severely inadequate. An assessment estimates that the global investments required for coral reef protection is approximately 7 times greater than current funding levels. So the need to increase funding is urgent. And there is also a common understanding that public funding will not come to rescue and close that gap. And rarely are blue economy businesses considered commercial enough for domestic banks or other financial institutions. Therefore, we need a set of tools to develop the businesses, innovative new business models, and organize the finance across the growth of the business from idea to scale, so the entrepreneurs is not falling between the cracks on the financial road to commercial finance. And with regard to the toolkit, we need pure grants, concessional loans and guarantees, and specifically devoted to small ticket sizes ranging from 200K to 2.5 million, which is really a sweet spot of my organization, UNCDF. And of course, commercial finance in the end of the road, which takes care of more bigger ticket sizes. And in this way, the finance needs also to be coupled with technical assistance or business advice to be successful. Mm-hmm. So what makes this program so special in my view is this investment continuum, right? Where all partners contribute to building that investment continuum with a broad set of tools available, starting with the scientific findings, develop innovative ideas, first supported by grants, then concessional debt, and finally commercial investments. It will not succeed for every investment, but hopefully enough to make a difference.
Thanks, Anders. You touched a little bit about the investment layers and of course the role of CDF and others. Could you maybe just explain the actual investment case in Fiji and how any investors that are tuning in today should be looking at this transaction? If you could just give us a bit more detail on that.
Sure, so maybe more of an overview. So Fiji is a challenging environment with less than 1 million of a population, but also a market where a substantial impact investment in blue economy hasn't yet been made, right? And competition is not strong in that area. So I would say there are plenty of opportunities in Fiji to develop businesses that can both be profitable and sustainable. With a substantial impact on communities of the islands, as well as preserving coral reef ecosystems that are essential for the current and future health of the global ocean ecosystem. And with potentially high IRRs and high social impact, these opportunities should prove to be very sound investment. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate in this program. The blue economy opportunities may not yet be well known by investors, and some more public record may be needed for it to become really known. But I see really that Fiji has a key role in the Pacific to show the way, because it's one of the most developed economies. There is a conducive environment for investments and the existence of opportunities that can be replicated in other small island states exist there. So our role as the UN and with our colleague organization is to engage both the local financial institutions on one side, so they build up some experience on how to assess blue economy opportunities in Fiji, so they actually provide credit and enhancement to them. And on the other side, we want to help the companies build business models that are profitable and sustainable, and that can be replicated and scaled. And so they can access, of course, the finance from the financial institution on the other side. So it's a matchmaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating to hear how this really works at the grassroots level and the support going directly to these entrepreneurs and innovators. Would you like to say just a few more words about the specific role of UNCDF within the UN family in making these blended transactions possible? I know there's a lot of devil in the details in this piece of the work, and CDF has been really forging these paths for decades now.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. And maybe I can give you a couple of examples, which is also part of the panel. But yeah, starting, the UN is deploying these resources from multiple specialized agencies to catalyze the conditions needed to advance environmental preservation and attract commercial capital. And this includes the involvement, and we heard of that, UNDP, UNEP, the joint SDG Fund, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, and Blue Finance in Fiji. So in this partnership, the UNCDF is using its bridge facility to deploy concessional loans. Technical assistance is being used to support the companies and teams on the ground creating investable opportunities. So finance and TEA. And the name bridge is used at UNCDF because we want to bridge the finance between grants and commercial finance. So our concessional loans aim to equip companies with the credit history and help them to grow to become large enough to attract commercial capital. And if it's still challenging, we can use UNCDF's guarantees to pull commercial investor in sooner than they otherwise would have. Now, just one example. So we saw from the video, Beka Adventure Divers is a for-profit marine conservation project and business with whom UNCDF is currently working. They had a small loan from ANC Bank Group, which they serviced regularly. But when they shopped around for a larger loan to finance their CapEx need, they weren't able to secure financing from banks. One of the reasons is that the collateral was not enough. So this is when they started working with Blue Finance and UNCDF to seek help for financing their long-term needs. And the COVID crisis, of course, made availability of finance even more difficult for them. So UNCDF is now preparing a concessional loan so they can grow their businesses to scale. Fertile Factory, and we may hear from Sanjeev and Jody, is another candidate which finds it challenging to access commercial finance, and UNCDF will hopefully provide a concessional credit to this entity as well. So, and both of these companies are part of the so-called missing middle, a segment of SMEs that often is struggling to access finance and where UNCDF has specialized in providing finance. But just to end on two very important principles when a UN agency enters into the investment space, right? First, additionality. If there is a local bank or an impact investor or any other institution that can provide affordable credit to the business, UNCDF will step aside. Secondly, UNCDF always tries to minimize the subsidy. First of all, we want to avoid grants if possible. If it's a business that generates revenues and returns, we don't want to give them, we would give away funding for free. We want to try to revolve the funds to as many businesses as possible. We even run our financial models to make sure that interest rate is not too generous, even if we provide concessional funding. And for the funders, if it's taxpayers, member states, philanthropic entities, cost efficiency is often appreciated. I'll stop there and hand you back to you.
Thank you, Anders. No, excellent details. And I know there are questions coming in for you from the chat, so we'll get to those after we go through the panel. But I think these kinds of details and the actual mechanisms that are at play are what many people are thrilled to learn about. So it's really impressive and appreciated. I'm going to move on now to Ms. Jody Smith, who is partner at Matanotaki. We saw the excellent video, Jody, so congratulations for that. Matanotaki has worked for years with local entrepreneurs to nurture impact-driven companies. How is Matanotaki playing a key role in facilitating the pipeline transactions for the investments that Anders was just outlining? Over to you, Jody.
Thank you. Firstly, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us here on the panel. I like to think that my work in Fiji started 160 years ago. What I mean by that is my great-great-grandfather was the first Chinese man in Fiji. So he came here via the gold rush in Australia from southern China. And he had heard of all the bountiful resources of Fiji. So sugarcane, sandalwood, sea cucumber. So he came here and he actually was one of the early entrepreneurs. He had the first general store. The reason I share this story is because 160 years later, I am here and I find myself dealing with really similar commodities. We have several businesses who are, with sugar, sandalwood, sea cucumber. And this for me really sets a bit of a benchmark. I want to know that in 160 years' time, when we're looking back, or when my ancestors are looking back, that they will have looked to us and seen that we shifted the needle. So really this is what drives myself. This is what drives Sanjeev, who you'll hear from. And in fact, these passions that every one of the entrepreneurs I work with here in Fiji have, we want to be the drivers of change in the private sector. So what is the key role that Matanotaki plays here facilitating investments into pipeline businesses? So basically what we do, we'll work with our partners. So WWF has been a really key partner here. We've worked with them to identify the key threats to the reef system. So what was identified for Fiji was overfishing, ecosystem destruction, particularly agriculture and forestry, poor waste and pollution management, as you saw from the video. So with those threats identified, my job, and I feel sometimes like I have the best job in the world, I get to go out and I get to find the entrepreneurs and the pioneering businesses so you can actually bring the solutions to the problems. And the Fertile Factory is one of those. So Matanotaki then works with entrepreneurs to really make environmental impact foundational to the businesses. Then we support as well with financial modeling, growth planning. Then we make the introductions to the investors. We sometimes negotiate on behalf of the entrepreneurs. And then once the investments are received, we support the entrepreneurs as their companies grow.
Fantastic. And thanks for the personal story, because I think it's many of us inside, I think this panel are here for very personal reasons. And I think yours is really, so ideal for this conversation. So you do have, I think, a fabulous job. I think I have the best job in the world, but anyway, we can take that offline after.
We'll take that later.
Exactly. Do you see, how has there been a development, and is there a demand for the concessional and commercial finance that can actually be the bridge? Anders talked about that missing middle. I think you're seeing also this disconnect between that entrepreneur, that startup, and what can be, membership in this kind of transaction. So how are you seeing that change over time?
Yeah, we've seen a huge demand. Basically, my partners and I went out on a limb 3 years ago. 2 of us gave up our day jobs because we knew there was a lot of investment coming for climate and for environmental investment. But we knew there wasn't a whole lot of pipeline. There weren't many bankable businesses ready. There were a lot of sort of projects, conservation type projects, but none of these had kind of financial sustainability built into them. So we took a leap of faith and we started screening businesses. So in 3 years, we've screened 150 businesses in Fiji alone. We've screened some in other countries as well, but 150 here. And we've now got a pipeline of about 40 businesses, which we believe have huge potential to deliver both on financial returns and environmental impact. And the investment need for those is between 75 and 100 million US. And the key sectors: waste and pollution, waste and plastics management, regenerative agriculture, and mariculture and aquaculture. The opportunities are exciting, the businesses are exciting. The investment process itself in Fiji, it's been challenging so far. We've not seen this type of investment before. So there's a number of regulatory processes that kind of need to catch up, but we're in really good dialogue with, government agencies, civil service to really streamline all of that. So that's a really exciting part of this as well.
Excellent, amazing. 150 companies in 3 years. Jody, could you tell us a bit about how you evaluate these companies and the proposed, transactions, especially when we're going back to that coral reef reality, right? How are you keeping that linked in terms of impact from a coral reef perspective?
To answer this, I could tell you about our evaluation matrices. I could tell you about the KPIs we measure. I could tell you about the scientists that we work with. But to the despair of my partners, I'm going to tell you my kind of number one evaluation tool. It's sitting down and having a meal and having a bottle of wine with the entrepreneurs. And the reason why that is so important for me is I want to see and hear the passion and the drive that the entrepreneur has, because at the end of the day, that is going to be what makes the investment successful, that delivers the ongoing environmental positive impact.
Yeah, I've heard this time and again, from Silicon Valley to Wall Street, now to the streets of Suva. It's that passion, it is the belief that this will indeed be a success that often determines the success. So yeah, fabulous answer, and definitely resonating here in Manhattan with me. Just to tee up Sanjeev, who's our next speaker, why do you think the Fertile Factoring Company is a game-changing solution for Fiji?
Well, when I came to Fiji, so my mother was born here, but I wasn't born here. I've since become a citizen. But when I first came here, it was to turn around a failing agricultural asset. And I had never worked in agriculture before. So my background is business turnaround, business development, but I'd never done an agriculture project. And so I really learned firsthand, because this farm was right beside the ocean. And I learned not only the human damage to the soil from tillage, agriculture, and heavy agricultural inputs, but we had these drainage systems, and the drainage systems they led straight out to the ocean. There was no life in the soil, there was no life in the drains, there was no life out in the ocean. And I learned really fast about how we had to change that. And one of my dreams while I was turning this business around was to find basically a company that could make natural fertilizers. So when I met with Sanjeev, I was super excited about it. And yeah, why is it game changing? I mean, apart from what I just mentioned, the life of our landfill is going to be extended. We're going to be able to bring local manufacturing opportunities to Fiji and replace imported products, which is really huge. We're going to be able to keep money circulating in Fiji. But I think most importantly, and you've heard me saying this through my whole last 5 minutes, is for me, the game-changing thing about the Fertile Factory is that the entrepreneur behind this business and what he's doing is going to be really inspirational for other people in Fiji. And I think it's going to inspire a whole lot of particularly younger people to want to get into agriculture. So yeah, that's it for me. Thanks.
Fantastic. No, Jody, really appreciate all of your responses this morning. I'm now going to turn to Mr. Sanjeev Chand, who is CEO and founder of the Fertile Factory and Company. And Sanjeev, great tee up from Jody already. Your company is the reason this program has come to life, supporting impact-driven companies in their journey. Could you please tell us a bit about your business and the products that you offer?
Thank you, Lisa. Very warm Bula Vinaka to everyone, and I'm ecstatic to be here. So I'll get right into it. So about 10 years ago, my father asked me to move back from California to Fiji and join the family waste business. And I came from an engineering background. So and so my father started with a single truck. And when I joined, there were a few trucks, but now we've got a fleet of over 50 specialized trucks, which are designed for handling and transporting waste in Fiji. So we've got about 500 bins, so roughly 3,000 cubic meters of space, if you want to volumize it, available to the general public. And we dispose, on average 2 to 3 million liters of tanked liquid waste per month. So, we are on average about transporting 2,000 to 3,000 tons of solid waste. That's inclusive of green waste, household waste, medical waste, and construction waste. So including plastics. So it took me 5 years to actually set up the first transfer station in Fiji. It might not be to international levels yet, but that was together with Silver City Council. Now, what basically I'm pointing at that we kind of see ourselves as the experts of moving rubbish from like a client to the dump or the landfill. But that's where the problem lies, and that disposing everything at landfills and dump sites. So these wasted opportunities is what led to the Fertile Factory and Company. So taking all the biomass, the green waste, the fish waste, manure, lime, cardboard. I mean, then through the vision that I came up with Matanotaki, we're going to turn it into a national fertilizer. In combination with farmer training. I mean, we will stop the devastating topsoil and the chemical runoff that Jody mentioned earlier, which is going into our oceans and killing our reefs.
Sorry, it's so incredible, Sanjeev, that you came back. You're seeing a solution and you're making it happen. Maybe could you tell us a bit about how financing and technical support helped you overcome some of those hurdles? I think it's been highlighted, the lack of longer term financing. I can imagine how the COVID-19 pandemic may have limited your mobility, things like that. If you could paint that picture a bit for us outside of Suva. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. So I met Jody, I think about 3 years ago, and she asked me this question, right? She goes, how can you do waste better? So this kind of sent me into this spiral of thinking, okay, what does she mean by this? So I had to take a real look into our business practices, our actions, our waste disposal methodology. And then, the Fertile Factory and Matanotaki, we started working together on this concept of waste minimization and green waste recycling, to a natural fertilizer. That was the only thing at that point that I saw that to me seemed lucrative and enough in the market to make a difference. And then later on, I found out more about how it was going to impact the environment, something that I did not know of. Now commercial banks, it's all about what profits, losses, repayments, assets, kind of things like that. But this financing, this has never been available. I did not believe it when initially she told me about this. And now I see it and I'm here, I have to believe it now. But with the help of Matanotaki, like our product development specialist, you mentioned technical support, is from Australia. All right. And the access to the concessional financing and this risk capital, especially during this pandemic, means, immediate actions. I wish we had this a year ago or maybe 2 years ago. So before a TC Herald or Anna, we would have been able to turn those tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of green waste that ended up in our landfills and into our dumps. We could have turned that into a product and put it back in the ground. And we've been able to do that. So, when especially this is coming from organizations that care about the environment. Now, I've been working nonstop during this pandemic, and I'm sure Jody can back me up with that. And this is with the land acquisition. This is trying to set up the factory. This is the plans, the permits, the business registration. And on top of that, I kind of got slapped with the environment impact assessment. It came out of nowhere. I didn't budget for it, but that didn't stop me, right? So all these are out-of-pocket costs that I've already incurred. And that is my drive to the Fertile Factory and Company. That's how much I believe in this. And having a partner like Matanotaki to support the development of my business has made me realize that, I can make the positive impact on the environment as well as it's going to be profitable.
Yeah. No, I can imagine how, like so many entrepreneurs, it can be so daunting to feel that you're facing all these challenges alone. So, having a partner, with you, guiding you, introducing you, supporting financially and otherwise, I think is really priceless. So maybe a little bit now, Sanjeev, because it's fascinating to hear from your leadership of this Fertile Factory, but how do you envision your business in the longer term having an impact on communities? Of course, on the coral reefs, because we know now the dangerous chemicals aren't going back into the ocean. So that I think many of us can understand. But what about the local communities? What about the Fijians that are working with you, working around you?
All right. Okay. So here's some fun facts. So my grandfather was actually one of the best farmers in Fiji, voted one of the best farmers in Fiji in the late 1980s. And, he was producing over 2,000 tons of sugarcane. So sugarcane farmer. My father was a sugarcane farmer. He bested my grandfather, a little over 2,000, almost 3,000 tons of sugarcane. Now, unfortunately, that same land now yields less than a couple of hundred tons. So I don't know, should I be lucky that I'm not a third generation farmer? Because that soil is dead, right? And now as Waste Clear, that's the business that my father started about 18 years ago. When I joined the business, I saw that there was this gap between the municipal councils and the government. So we worked with Ministry of Health in outreaching to these rural villages and communities that did not have access to solid and liquid waste management. And we started, they came to us and we went to them and we started working on these concepts. providing services that were not available to them. So we started capturing all this waste, which were basically ending up in rivers and the ocean. Now, I'll tell you a little bit, this little cool story. When we love fishing, my brother and I, he's really big into it. So we took a trip from Nandi to Suva in our new boat and fishing. So that's a little over 100 kilometers. In that journey, we caught one fish and I think maybe 6 garbage bags. And this is not a story I want to share when we're talking amongst friends about how big of a fish that we caught. But this is actually what's been happening and something that we've been turning around, from Waste Clear's perspective. Now, let's just think about this, right? We've got maybe annually around 2 to 4 meters of rainfall. We've got roughly 40,000 tons of chemical fertilizer that's coming into the country. And, so the Fertile Factory and Company is fixing a waste disposal problem, right? And that's the angle that we have taken. So we fixed that problem, and that's saving our coral reefs. So then we are making this product available to all communities at this reduced cost. So they don't, the common, let's say farmers in agriculture, if you're not in the sugar industry, you don't have concessional prices available for the imported fertilizer at this point. But our natural fertilizer is going to come in at that cost, if not lower, to the rest of Fiji. So and then the icing on the cake is this soil school, right? That's our CSR program. So by educating the farmers and the citizens of Fiji, just the way I was educated by Matanotaki, I mean, that is what we'll be giving back to the community free of charge.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I feel like you've just answered this my final question for you, but I mean, your business model really is changing business as usual, right? Maybe Sanjeev, if you can give us some specifics on the reef-positive adaptation of that piece, because it's clear the way you're approaching the issues that you're facing, the way you're approaching financing, none of that is business as usual. You're also pointing out, the historical impacts of consistent farming, et cetera, right? And the impacts on the soil. So a lot of that are lessons that are being learned, but specifically on the reef, would you be able to maybe say a few words on that?
Okay, so all right. Okay, so we talk about business as usual, but you're talking to the garbage man, right? You can see that. So there's no such thing as business as usual in this industry. Like I need to be an entrepreneur that's agile, that can think on his feet and then respond to problems as they occur. So like the one thing I want to point out is like this current pandemic and what it did to the medical system, right? And we were overwhelmed with the amount of medical waste that was generated. Now, you talked about the coral reefs and the impact that we have. So now every time there's a fairly heavy rain, what I see is the rivers turn red. And then the ocean, when we're trying to go fishing, let's say, that we see that right within the reefs and the outside edge of the reefs, everything is kind of red or brown, and it takes a couple of days before it dissipates. So before I did not understand that. Now, so there's this whole hurdle that we had with the I think like this kind of this overregulation, this bureaucratic hurdle because of this process, and no one was really aware of a program as such. So like I have the support of the councils. So in the central division being Nosuri, Nasinu, and Suva City councils, where they will be turning all of the compostable biomass to us, right? And you meant, so how are we returning back? So like my main goal, my main action is to fix as many of the problems as I can on the land so that devastation does not flow through into our marine ecosystem. I mean, that's how I see it. So now going back to the farmers, right? The Fijian farmers were never given a natural substitute or any substitute for the chemical fertilizer that they are using. And they were no one ever maybe told them, because I did not know of that. So, the Fertile Factory and Company here, together with Matanotaki, I mean, So we introduced this so-called Fijian-made natural fertilizer available to all Fijians and then to the entire Pacific region. Now, given that, working with Jody, and I said this technical group and this group of people, the so-called Evers, earlier in the video, they educated me on what my actions as a company was doing to the coral reefs. So as a family-owned business, and we have maybe a little over 100 employees at this point, I started to talk to them to see, okay, what can we do to bring about the change in changing the way they think, and then how their families think, and then the greater community thinks. And like these outreach programs that we've had with these rural areas, and mostly because pretty much everything here is coastal, and we deal with all of it because our company covers pretty much all of Fiji when it comes to waste. So our impact by changing the way we divert our waste streams and how we take care of it will have an immediate impact on how the devastation on the reef that's being caused by, I would say, from a waste perspective, is going to change.
Fantastic. Congratulations for the incredible work you're doing and for really, expanding the legacy of your family and their influence in Fiji. It's really impressive to hear. I'm going to move on to our next panelist, Mr. Terry Tamminen, Operating Advisor at Pegasus Capital Advisors. So now we have, I think, one of our first private investors on the line as part of our discussion. So Terry, we'd really love to hear from your perspective as an impact investor, and what likely will you be ready to fund and at what conditions? What does it take to really bring in a firm like yours? Over to you.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks to all the other panelists and distinguished guests. It's a real honor to participate in this and hear everyone's views, especially with the focus on waste. I can't tell you how much I think that is one of our biggest solutions globally, is to end the concept of waste. I think someday those landfills that we saw in the video earlier in the session will turn into gold mines. So that's another topic for a whole nother day, but I think it's one of the most overlooked sectors and opportunities when everyone's talking about solar panels and electric cars and such. Waste is the great opportunity. So to answer your question, I'd sort of give three basic parameters of what we're looking for. First of all, proven solutions. I think it's too late for startups. That's great for venture capitalists, but for people who are trying to solve the climate crisis, the sustainability crisis, I think we have to scale up and out proven solutions all over the world, especially in emerging economies. We can't wait for fairy dust to save us. So, and there are plenty. I mean, the truth is that, and waste is a good example where there's more than enough proven solutions of what you can do with these things. Certainly it takes government participation on the policy, but the technology is there, the financing is there under the right conditions. So again, I just emphasize proven solutions, scale them up fast. Second thing is government partners. It's great to have government partners both at the national and subnational level, because ultimately these challenges are happening at the local level with communities, and that's where the solutions will be. We know that more and more people are moving to cities, so cities is where the action is going to be, but policies that are important. And having been in government in the state of California, for example, I can tell you that what we did at a policy level in the entire state really mattered for both our local communities and our national government. So we really like the direct involvement of the government. I worked when I was managing the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation with the Government of Fiji on a renewable energy fund that could make loans to small islands for replacing their diesel with solar and battery systems and pay it back from the savings so that the fund would in perpetually fund more projects. And we couldn't have done that without the cooperation of the government. And then the final area that I'd say we're looking for is measuring, reporting, and verifying, MRV. We have to validate the impact. If we want to call ourselves impact investors, we have to validate that. And we have to focus money where we know it's going to be the most effective if we really want to have an impact, and not just replace someone else's capital. I mean, the truth is we could invest in wind farms in Texas, but all we're doing is pushing somebody else's money out of the way. That's not impact. What we would do in a place like Fiji and in other emerging economies, that could have a real impact if we're the only ones at the table or one of the few. So we want to be very effective, and we also want to avoid unintended consequences. So we really want to see life cycle analyses of different technologies and different projects so that we're sure that when we do the measuring, reporting, and verifying, that the results are likely to be positive, especially with UN Sustainable Development Goals in mind, not just sort of financial returns.
Excellent, Terry. Today's panel and really this overall investment is all about the blending of so many different, commitments. How is that financial blending helping fund managers like you expand investable opportunities?
Well, it's critical. It obviously helps us de-risk the investments. So the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is a good example. Subnational Climate Fund is another good example, where 20% of the capital or 25% of the capital is provided on a concessionary basis from either the Green Climate Fund or foundations or other kinds of concessionary capital providers. And that means there's a first loss position in case that some of these projects don't perform well. And also that they're typically taking a lower return so that the senior investors can get a return that's more aligned with their risk and return profiles. And that might sound greedy, but a lot of the investors, and especially if we want to get to trillions, not billions, as Christiana Figueres famously said, to solve the climate crisis, trillions of investments, you're dealing with things like pension funds. And you can't ask a pension fund to take a higher risk and a lower return, because if they lose some of their money, they're not going to turn to their pensioners and say, well, next year we're going to cut your pension in half because we meant well and we invested in a lot of these projects in emerging economies. They didn't do quite as well, So the de-risking is absolutely essential if we want to get to this, to the level and the scale of investment that's necessary to truly address our sustainability challenges.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see reef-positive investments expanding through things like the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and as new programs are launched?
Well, I think those are also really essential examples because they can be replicated. I think you get consortiums working together that don't normally. Investors tend to work with other investors, but they don't necessarily work with NGOs, with UN agencies, with other organizations that can add value, that can add intellectual capital, not just financial capital. And when we're talking about both emerging economies or challenging geographies to work in, sectors that, as I said in the beginning, you really want to make sure you're working with proven solutions that you can scale up, but nonetheless, they may not be as familiar to some investors and the staffing that does the diligence of these projects. They may not know that much about waste conversion technologies, for example, or something like we're looking at a project in Indonesia to work with black soldier flies and turn that from feeding on waste, the black soldier fly larvae, turning that into a protein that can be fed to fish, for example, instead of catching more fish and feeding them to the fish. I mean, so there's a number of emerging technologies like this that have been proven at scale, but which take a big educational leap for investors. And so having these consortiums working together gives you the chance to share the intellectual capital, and having foundations at the table, nonprofits that have grant programs and are supporting NGOs. That gives you access to people on the ground who can help your projects succeed and also help you identify good projects that you otherwise just would never know about. So I think these kind of consortium-based fund structures are really innovative and have great potential. And then, of course, we also hope when you have these kinds of meetings, these kinds of funds, that the meetings will be in places like Fiji. My last airplane trip prior to COVID, as a matter of fact, was to Malolo Island in Fiji for my last vacation. It was the last time I was on an airplane. And I can't wait to get back. So we hope that these kinds of consortia will work together and have meetings in great places like Fiji.
Well, I think that's inspiring for all of us to plan our next visit. I think Ambassador Prasad said they're opening next month, so I think we should start looking at our tickets. Thank you, Terry. Really phenomenal perspective from Pegasus Capital Advisors to this conversation. I'm going to move on to Mr. Olivier Wenden, Vice President and Chief Executive Officer of the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation. Olivier, welcome so much to the panel today. If you could please start us off, why did the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation initiate together with the Paul Allen Family Foundation? How did this innovative fund come together?
Well, thank you for inviting me to take part in this important event. So pleased to see, at least on screen, many faces that I know. And let me first of all present my thanks to the organizers and salute Fiji for their groundbreaking climate change bill passed last week. It's now legally binding the country to its commitment of net zero carbon emissions. So well done. This is a significant step forward. So to answer your question, allow me first of all to say that the Prince Albert II Monaco Foundation and Monaco in general are committed with their history on coral reef protection. And studying, protecting the coral reef ecosystems prevail in Monaco, whether through the displays at the Oceanographic Museum, of course, but also with the scientific work of the Monaco Scientific Research Center on coral ecosystems and coral physiology, but also with the various projects that the foundation has been supporting on the ground over the years. Just to remind you also that since July 2018, the ICRI Secretariat has been jointly co-chaired by the governments of Monaco, Australia, and Indonesia. And we have been, of course, very closely associated with the work of the ICRI Secretariat over the years. And Monaco hosted, namely, the 33rd General Meeting back in December 2018. There was also a momentum at the Our Ocean Conference back in June 2017 when Prince Albert II of Monaco and His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales introduced and presented the Coral Reef Life Declaration, which was then signed by 12 high-level representatives of governments. So further to this momentum in Malta, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation came to our foundation to discuss and initiate this new concept of a blended finance on coral reef protection. It was an important milestone, an important turn in the approach of philanthropy in general, because it really mixed governments with private stakeholders and traditional philanthropy. So that's what has been of interest for us when we decided to go ahead with this idea. We understand, of course, that the coral reef ecosystem is particularly at risk and need urgent attention in the face of climate change and global changes. I won't repeat the figures, but we all know that 90% of the coral reef are now at stake of extinction within 30 years. So we need to act fast with multi-partner approach. So I think that foundations like us had this role to play in putting the topics, first of all, at the forefront of the attention of the investors, firstly, of the governments also. But on the other hand, and Terry mentioned that in his intervention, we are also here to help source the best projects on the ground and the one with the most efficiency and the most ability to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Olivier. You've touched on this a little bit already in your first answer, but how do you see the role of philanthropies in constructing and developing the initiatives? I think you've already highlighted your presence and your criticality, but when it actually gets into the details of the construction of the actual initiative, what would you say is unique to a foundation like yours?
Well, in brief, I would say, and we are very specific as well, because we are the only foundation run by a running head of state. So that makes us very special. And of course, it helps tackle at the highest political level some challenges that we face on the ground. But in general, philanthropists have many roles to play. And first of all, I would say it's all about the principles, in the sense that establishing and growing partnerships is key to our mandate as a foundation. We cannot do it alone. We bring small pieces to the table, but our positioning, neither militant nor politically inclined, make it suitable to convene partners around the same issue. So it's about also neutrality and being able to reach top to bottom and bottom to top approach. Secondly, I would say it's about the modalities of action. And as a private foundation, we have some flexibility in getting things done, a certain ability also to take risks and innovate, and a capacity to move swiftly. So this agility makes it opportune and efficient for foundations to launch new initiatives. And I would give you some more examples, because the Global Fund for Coral Reef is probably the most achieved initiatives that we launch, but we have also identified in the Med 3 other topics. So the Med Fund, which is a state fund to protect and grow marine protected areas in the region, but also the Monk Seal Alliance, which is an alliance of partners in the Med to conserve and protect this species at risk. And lastly, the Beyond Plastic Med initiative, which brings together a lot of industry key players active on the field of reducing the use of plastic. So to fight against plastic pollution, but on the land and not wait until it's in the sea. Mm-hmm. And the last initiative that we're very proud of is more a campaigning initiative, Because the Ocean initiative, which pulls together constant parties to promote the consideration of the ocean in the UNCCC negotiations. Mm-hmm. So last point I would say is all about also inspiration when it comes to foundation like us, and to promote beyond the circle of experts and partners, the topics, the solutions, and the ideas. This is what Prince Albert is doing on a relentless basis, to convene and convince at political level, but also on multilateral levels.
Thank you, Olivier. Maybe just, you mentioned several of the foundations that you're working with. Maybe just to focus in on the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, how do you see their contribution to these challenges of climate and biodiversity that we've been discussing this morning? Do you see any specific value add, or how do you sort of define that maybe for our listeners?
So I will reassure you, and yes, I see a big value, an added value, amazing added one. Well, I would say that the fund is, first of all, unique in its intent, with a focus on SDG 14. It's the first one ever. It is also unique in the scope of the partnership across philanthropies, states, and corporate donors. This is also very special. And it is also unique, of course, in its approach through blended finance. So it's like a triple win, and it really deploys concessionary finance to blue economy businesses. So I see the fund as a critical demonstrative initiative, able to confirm that sustainable and environmentally positive businesses can bring about protection of the ecosystem. And this is the transformative change that we are all after. Mm-hmm. Lastly, the fund is also about bridging or filling the gap between marine biodiversity protection and adaptation to climate change. And this is also significant, since we can no longer just mitigate the impact of climate change, but we really need to address adaptation to climate change. And this is totally embodying our new strategy here at the Foundation about this nexus on ocean, climate, and biodiversity. So thinking about a nexus rather than silos. This is not new, but the COVID situation has probably pushed us further in that direction, and the fund is definitely addressing this nexus approach.
Right. No, and I think several speakers have also mentioned the countdown to Glasgow and the conversations at COP26, and I do think trying to recognize the multi-sectoriality of what we're trying to achieve has to be a given. It has to be breaking down those silos. We understand that all too well inside the United Nations at times, and I think projects like this really demonstrate that the expertise can be tapped, the focus can be brought to the issue and the expertise applied. So thank you so much, Olivier. Wonderful, wonderful intervention. I'm just very aware of the time, and I don't want to shortchange any of our tremendous speakers. So without further ado, last but definitely not least, welcome to Mr. James Smith. As you recall, James is the Deputy Director for Marine Environment at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the United Kingdom. James, you are very, very welcome. Thanks for joining us. We would love, James, you sort of representing our member state piece of this puzzle, not so much from the Fiji leadership at the country, at the project level, but potentially from a wider member state perspective. Could you elaborate why, what the UK's perspective is, and why is it critical for member states to team up with the private sector, with philanthropies, with investors, to save our coral reefs?
Thank you, Lisa. And firstly, yeah, welcome to everyone joining from around the globe. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here today. I mean, it's such a rich and important discussion with so many distinguished guests and attendees. So, and really exciting to hear the innovative projects underway as well. But firstly, I'd like to say, the UK is obviously really proud to be one of the early contributors and member states to the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. The support is part of our wider £500 million UK Blue Planet Fund, which really is there and is designed to support developing countries to protect marine environment and reduce poverty on these really important issues. I think, we've heard in the discussions, it's absolutely clear that coral reefs are among the most valuable ecosystems on Earth. They harbour just such an extreme high biodiversity compared to other ecosystems, supporting 25% of marine life, more than 1 billion people directly relying on coral reef resources and for food, income, tourism. So I think that side of the biodiversity equation is clear. Likewise, in terms of coral reefs are at the forefront of climate change. We know that we've heard the increasing anthropogenic threats, but that coupled with the warming of the seas, the ocean acidification, we've lost half of the world's live coral over the last 30 to 50 years. And in some of the scenarios for 2 degrees warming, the position becomes pretty bleak for global survival of coral reefs. So as you'd expect from a kind of a UK member state position, ensuring, and picking up on what Olivier said, ensuring that climate change adaptation and resilience and mitigation is fully considered through our policies, both international and domestic on marine and fisheries is absolutely vital. But clearly this has to be about global action. So as you say, Lisa, in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow this November, of which obviously the UK is presidency at the moment, or taking over the presidency for COP26, really, I think the best action we can take to protect the ocean is really to work towards and through the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and limit global temperature rise to well below 1.5 degrees. But I think as has been mentioned, there's clearly a funding gap. It's estimated that less than, I think, 1% of the global aid spending goes towards sustainable ocean economy. So I think that's why, that investment, and as others have mentioned as well, it's the investment, but also the coordination and the supporting tools that go with it. And that's across all sectors. So as you say, public, private and philanthropic is really so important to restore coral reefs, help communities and the livelihoods that depend on them to adapt to climate change and really become more resilient in the sort of scenarios that we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. No, really excellent perspective in the grandiosity of the issue that we're trying to tackle. The target of 100 billion, less than 6 weeks away, facing the international community. The UK is obviously leading in many sectors with giving that public funding to so many issues around sustainable development. How do you see, what are the benefits of using public sector funding to unlock private investment? And have you seen any great examples of that, whether it be, filling biodiversity funding gaps, using business models to address biodiversity loss, some of the examples we've seen today, or maybe even more broadly on sustainable financing?
Yeah, no, I think it's really good question. I think, and it comes back to that, how can we fill the funding gap and how can we make best use of that investment and essentially use and leverage the public sector funding to do that, I think, because it's clear that whilst we're increasing our understanding of the impacts of those human-induced pressures, we're still behind in terms of that funding gap. So I think in terms of, both the UK's Blue Planet Fund and by funding programs such as the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, we are seeking to bring together both those, obviously the public and the private sector finance side to sort of unlock that impact. I think it's, for me, it's about that enabling environment. So what we're hoping to try and do with the public sector funding that we're putting in here is really allowing the development of an investment pipeline. So allowing that environment that allows the programs to establish and crucially to scale up, as we've talked about before, so they're enduring and making an enduring impact in the local areas. Mm-hmm. And for me, that what we're trying to do with the public funding is really addressing or enhancing, I guess, investor confidence. So we've talked about that sort of, how do we unlock and how do we de-risk some of that private sector finance, which I think, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs does so well in that blended finance model. That's exactly what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve with the UK investment. Mm-hmm. But I think, just picking up on the UK's Blue Planet Fund, for example, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So, as I say, part of that is Global Fund for Coral Reefs. But we're trying to look at a whole myriad of different anthropogenic stresses, I guess. So we've mentioned pollution is a big one as well. That's a key theme of what we're trying to tackle in terms of our investment across the Blue Planet Fund as well. And likewise, looking at those innovative finance mechanisms which then can attract and leverage the private sector funding. But this is all about, crucially, how it gets down to the local areas. So how do we actually get the funding to support local initiatives that have that impact and the sustainability on the ground going forward? And as we've heard in the really great discussion, that sort of unlocking and being able to sustain it locally is a key part of what we're trying to do with all the blended finance instruments.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, James, just as a final question, why the Fiji program? I mean, I'm sure, given the global scope, there are many innovative projects, but why the Fiji program? Why is it important to the UK in terms of what it brings to the larger discussion?
No, definitely. I mean, it's a really good question. And others have said it as well. I mean, we've heard in the opening remarks, for example, we know that small island developing states are disproportionately affected by climate change. Fiji and other SIDS clearly rely on healthy coral reefs, related ecosystems to support sort of livelihoods, food security. We mentioned the critical culture aspect to that, and of course tourism. But also in terms of the coastal resilience and the actual coastal defences in terms of that climate change aspect as well. So, I mean, for all of those reasons, the UK is committed to supporting SIDS, writ large by really trying to be a leading partner in addressing those climate and economic vulnerability aspects out to 2025 and beyond. Mm-hmm. But I think for us, it's really important to build the linkages and understand where this support can interact with a range of activities that are going on locally and across, in particular, Fiji. And we've mentioned it before, or it's come out, but I just wanted to reaffirm it's getting that additionality. So this is about identifying and building the synergies of work that's already going on the ground. But crucially without displacing any other funding. So it's really looking at how we can enhance that and get additional impact for what we're trying to sort of put in terms of the investment. And the Fiji project itself and the activities are hugely aligned with what we are trying to do as the UK aims, supporting capacity building and that access to that sustainable finance that allows essentially on these areas the sustainable management of marine protected areas. And it's really interesting to sort of see the blue finance initiatives in particular, you know, how that sort of the support to the development of the co-management agreements for the Fijian locally managed marine area networks, how that comes together with some of the associated structures to generate the revenues from the sort of reef first businesses that are linked, that are new and existing around those networks. And I think this for me kind of is a real good example of how all of this comes together on the ground. So linking finance to the local initiatives and the positive impact on the environment and the livelihoods. So I think for me, it's a great example of how it comes together at that local level to make a real difference. So hugely important work. And I think, you know, as you've mentioned, it's now about also looking forward. So you would not be surprised as UK that we're hoping to really place nature at the heart of COP26 in Glasgow through the Leaders Pledge for Nature, which I know Fiji is a member and signed up to. And through the range of international partners that we're working through and with, to really advocate that increased ambition and really a step change in how we use these nature-based solutions, including the protection of marine protected areas and sort of 30% of the global ocean by 2030, and the range of adaptation and mitigation initiatives that are on the way to really help position us in the best place on these really global sort of challenges out to 2030 and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, James. We really appreciate your intervention, and we will definitely be watching the preparations for COP26 in the coming weeks, and we'll all be rooting for the UK presidency in that regard, and all the initiatives you mentioned. So thank you so much. We've had a tremendous outpouring of questions from some of the listeners today, and I really regret that time has limited us. We've had such great speakers that we won't be able to go through all of them. But Penny, I'd like to definitely forward a question to you, which is really interesting because it touches on accessing donor funds for some of the different objectives that we've been talking about here. And the question is, what are the positive interactions or complementarities you see between coral reef investments on the one hand, climate adaptation and resiliency, biodiversity preservation, and disaster risk resilience on the other side? And the question says, these answers are essential for accessing donor funds with different objectives. So, you know, climate funds versus a biodiversity fund versus DRR funding. So over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it's a very, very important question because obviously the fund does want to attract investment from a variety of donors and not just traditional donors, but also non-traditional donors. And I think the most important point is that, you know, yes, investments in coral reefs and related ecosystems without doubt generate multiple benefits across different development sectors. You know, coral reefs occupy just 0.1% of the ocean floor, but they support 25% of all marine species everywhere. So, you know, investments in coral reef ecosystems don't just benefit local coral countries or communities, they benefit us all. And so maybe I can try and, you know, give a few quick examples of sort of the complementarities or the benefits of coral reef investments in, you know, these sectors around resilience, around biodiversity conservation, around disaster risk management. You know, if we take sustainable coral reef tourism, for example, I mean, that shouldn't just be a business model that generates revenue for investors. It really should, you know, prioritize the conservation and protection of reefs, where these reefs are actually accounted for as assets that underpin business purpose and success. So if you have an eco hotel that markets the marine protected area in which it, you know, on which it depends, you know, for its pristine views and its sort of tourism product, then, you know, that investment should help to conserve that natural asset. And of course, if these businesses, work with local communities and promote employment in local communities and conserve those ecosystems, they're also building resilience around food supplies and local employment as well. So as you can see, there are sort of multiple benefits around adaptation, biodiversity conservation, and managing risks. Same with fisheries, where investment can actually trigger practices or changes in practices away from degradation and dependency. And we should also just talk about, the role of reefs in protecting people and property. Healthy coral reefs break up as much as 97% of wave energy before they reach the shore. And so this can, of course, dramatically reduce flooding and beach erosion in coastal communities, which, given sea level rise and large storms, this is a very important consideration. And, this type of protection, conserving natural ecosystems as your defences is also the most cost effective. And I think the final point, I know you're running short of time, the final point I would say is just that we must remember coral reefs are also our medicine cabinet. Many organisms on reefs, sponges, corals, sea hares, they contain molecules that have really potent anti-inflammatory, antiviral, anti-tumor, antibacterial effects. And, new treatments for Alzheimer's, for heart disease, viruses, inflammation are under development now. And I think in light of COVID, the complementarity, in terms of resilience, in terms of, making sure that we conserve these ecosystems, in terms of managing disasters. And, before we always talked about natural disasters like storms, but now we're talking about pandemics. It's really important to understand reefs, not just as a beautiful thing that we all like to go on holiday to look at, but it's, an investment in an ecosystem that can bring multiple benefits in many directions for many countries. Hopefully I've managed to answer your question quickly.
No, these are fabulous questions, and we will do our best to post some of the responses through our various channels as we go forward. Colleagues, this is the end of my role. It's been a tremendous honor to serve as your moderator. I would not be a worthwhile head of the Joint SDG Fund Secretariat if I did not mention that there is a Donate Now button available to all of our listeners if you'd like to take out that credit card or your Venmo account and actually make a personal donation to the Joint SDG Fund to ensure some of these programs go further. So that's the plug from inside the fund, where the monies that we're mentioning here today can always go further with your individual support. And I'm delighted also to now introduce you to our closing, our speaker for our closing remarks, which is Ms. Ilaria Carnevali. Ilaria is the Deputy Executive Coordinator of the United Nations Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, which administers funds like the Coral Reef Fund, like the Joint SDG Fund, every day behind the scenes. So Ilaria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, for the UN Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, who acts as the trustee for both the Global Fund for Coral Reef and the Joint SDG Fund. It's a real honor to be with you today, together in this very informative, inspiring event, which is drawing to a close. And please allow me to thank, first of all the panelists for their contributions to driving awareness and action for coral reef solutions, and for the passion we could feel as they were sharing their experiences and their perspectives with us today. Also, thank to all the panelists, to the participants attending the event, for joining us from different time zones around the world, and for participating and putting on the table very important and challenging questions. As the panelists have shown, the initiative is really an excellent example of the type of multi-stakeholder collaboration that is needed to achieve the SDGs, with governments, private, civil society, foundations, and the UN working together to protect coral reefs and create sustainable livelihoods. We are convinced that it will trailblaze and inspire more countries to replicate similar initiatives. We have heard how coral species have shown the most rapid increase in extinction risk of all assessed groups, and these reefs, with support of an incredible amounts of biodiversity and ecosystem services, will vanish if they continue to be neglected. So we have also heard as the reefs and the marine coastal ecosystems play a critical role in the creation of business and employment opportunities in Fiji and their conservation is therefore a true wealth for the country and for all of us. Today's broad array of program partners and supporters highlighted yet again the crucial role played by the United Nations pool funds in innovating and bringing together partnerships, bringing together new financial models that can support communities and biodiversity strongholds. And indeed, we believe that the pool funds are one of the best investments partners can make to maximize UN joint impact on the ground and to foster broad-based partnerships, which can amplify and multiply the impact of UN catalytic work towards SDG achievement, which was also recognized by the funding compact adopted by the GA in 2019. Now, the game-changing innovation of the initiative we discussed today is the way in which impact investments are unlocked to restore and protect local reef ecosystems for future generations. And really an immense thanks to our partners for their effort to change the trajectory of coral reef loss and build the first global blended finance mechanism focused on the restoration of reef ecosystems. But especially we want to thank the Fiji government, UNDP, UNCDF, our local and global partners, public and private, for their support and program leadership, and all the donors who are generously contributing to the realization of these groundbreaking approaches. Today's panelists have demonstrated the impact and scale that the joint SDG Fund and the Global Fund for Coral Reefs are making in a small island development state like Fiji. As the first catalytic investment approved by both funds, it's truly an exceptional example of how blended finance can be supported by the UN system on the ground. By fostering synergies into the UN development system and alliances of public and private actors, we can drive greater coherence and cohesion. Today's powerful coalition have put at the forefront coral reefs action globally. And this is really about focusing on the distinct role of the UN and leveraging all the organization's unique assets and bringing together a variety of partners around common goals. And this way we can really reverse negative trends and transform the future. It is critical that we work to deploy these resources catalytically to attract much larger financing flows, as the financing gap remains very important. In partnership with member states, philanthropists, financial institutions, and impact investors, we can help foster, and we will help foster, not only a green, but also a blue recovery for people and planet. We are really thrilled to see Fiji become a demonstrative model for blue impact investment in the coming years. And collectively, as the UN system and the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office will continue to play its part, we remain fully committed to supporting partners to come together in innovative partnership in unlocking sustainable finance for nature-based solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being today. It was a pleasure to have all of you and all the participants. We bring this session to a close now. Thank you all and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.